Today we're discussing a very controversial topic, and due to this, I want to just set the stage for what we're about to discuss and let you know that my intention for sharing what I'm sharing today is to create clarity, to create understanding, and ultimately to empower both men and women to be clear about who they are, what they want, and how to achieve that through the balancing, the awareness of their energies. So let's get into it. All right. What sparked this was my last video sharing all about masculine versus feminine energy. And the topic at hand was, the title essentially is Spiritual Men Are Feminine. The spiritual community has the most feminine men. How do I know this? Because that used to be me. When I first got into spirituality, I was highly in my feminine energy. I was focusing on the more creative aspects of life. I was focusing on the externals, waiting for somebody to provide for me rather than being in the state of wanting to provide. This is causing an imbalance in our community. Let me explain. The reason that we don't have the kind of lives that we want, because there is a deficiency within the men in the community. They are not tapping into the potential that they know they could be tapping into, and therefore they're not playing their role to provide a structure and foundation for us to build anything on top of. It is until the men come into the full embodiment of who they are that they will be able to be good protectors and provide the energy necessary for the families and the communities to thrive truly. And if you don't have the right brotherhood around you, that's going to be very hard to accomplish, especially if the energy of masculinity isn't already present with you. You're going to have a hard time tapping into that part of yourself. If anything I said triggered you in any way, that's probably because there's something in you that knows that you're not tapping into the masculine potential that you could be tapping into. When you're ready, leave the herd and join the pack. And I knew that that was going to trigger a lot of people, triggered people for different reasons. But I wanted to articulate it that way because I think it was the most straightforward way of just sharing that thought without beating around the bush. And so, but you know, in today's society, people are walking on eggshells. So when you point out blatant things like that, it upsets people. So I have some notes here just so I don't veer off topic and so I stay on topic to what we're talking about. Look, so let's start with masculinity. When I'm talking about masculinity, I'm not talking about the external. The external is just a manifestation. When you see a man that has muscles, when you see a man that's fit, when you see a man that has money and resources, when you see a man that has what he has in his life as a result of his masculinity, it's not those things that make him masculine. It is the pursuit and the embracing of the masculine role that paves the way for those things to manifest. So if we're talking about what masculinity is protection, provision, and the presence of the man within the family and communal unit of life. You know, that's what the order of things, how that things have manifested, right? So in order to have those things, have those qualities, you're going to then need to tap into certain parts of yourself. So protection, right? Let's just highlight protection, for instance. You can't protect if you're weak. You can't protect if you're not fit. You can't protect if you're not prepared to do what's necessary to protect. So that's where the physical aspect comes. You can't provide if you don't have resources. You can't provide if you don't have some way of generating those resources. So that's where the business and those kinds of things come into play. So all these things that are external are just manifestations of a man embracing a masculine role. So when I come in here and I'm dressed, look how I look, I'm not saying that this is masculinity. What I'm talking about specifically is the embracing of a role day to day in the actions, shit that you really can't show on camera. I can't show you the mindset that I've taken on. I can't show you my perspective and how I position myself relative to my family, to the community. I can't show you that on camera, really. It's through every single action that's subtle sometimes that will let you know that I'm in that position. You know, sometimes you might not even notice it if you don't know what to look for. the masculine role is a servant role. It's a sacrificial role. It's a role of provision and putting others before yourself sometimes. And almost, being willing to sacrifice yourself for the greater good. That's the power of masculinity. And a lot of people don't talk about that aspect because they only want the benefit that comes along with it, the leadership, the role, the positioning you at a higher level of society or in the unit. They're looking at it from that role, but they don't realize that the responsibilities that come along with that. So my intention for sharing what I shared was to open men's eyes to that responsibility in that role and the lack of that taking on that role in their lives. And so if people feel some way about that, it's probably because they are looking at themselves and recognizing that they're out of alignment, they're incongruent to actually taking on these responsibilities. So that's the issue that the spiritual community is suffering from, that men, and somebody articulated it pretty well and said that this lifestyle, like the spiritual concepts, appeal to a very certain demographic. And a lot of times it's people who are running away from responsibility. It's people who are not wanting to contribute or play a role. And I definitely see myself in that. In the past, I definitely see others around me, part of that community, as exhibiting those traits and qualities. The thing is, though, for a man, it's much more detrimental to have that mindset, because men in the role that we've traditionally played as provisionaries, as protectors, things that really require honing in discipline and certain qualities over long periods of time, that is a very slippery slope when you're not tuning into those qualities. And also, I want to say that the spiritual experience, and I think spiritual growth and development, looks different for the masculine than it does for the feminine. I believe that the masculine, the spiritual journey of the masculine requires certain catalysts for the masculine to be activated. And that's where we get more into the archetype of the warrior, right? We get into the archetype of, like, you have to go to battle, not with the outside, but with yourself. You got to go to war with the darkness within. You got to go to war and be strong and fit enough to be able to take on the responsibilities necessary for the masculine role. And this is where rites of passage come into play. Traditionally, men would have had to go through some hard, enduring things in order for them to be of the caliber of man or person that would be equipped enough to tolerate or handle the responsibilities that come with that role. And as a consequence, would be assigned the privilege to have a family, depending on whether they went through that rite of passage or not. Now, we've lost that in today's society. Now people are saying, oh, men need to tap into their feminine energy, right? That's what they've been saying for years. Men need to get more in touch with their feminine side. That the issue is that men are out of touch with their femininity. I don't agree to that. I don't see it that way. That has not been my experience, because a lot of what we label masculine energy, specifically toxic masculinity, is actually overly feminine energy coming through men. A lot of what we label toxic masculinity is overly feminine energy coming through men. So they're thinking that, oh, these motherfuckers shooting themselves, joining gangs, doing this kind of behavior, being overly emotional and reactive, they're thinking that's masculinity. That ain't masculinity. Masculinity is composed, is stoic, is calculated. It's not reactive or responsive emotionally to the situation at hand. So if somebody gets upset and is willing to shoot and take a life, that is not masculine energy. So the fact that they're looking at that as toxic masculinity makes so much sense why they've gone down this path of thinking that men have to embrace their femininity, when in fact men just have to tap in to their aligned, balanced, sacred masculine, which will always have some feminine component, because that's existence. And so you're always going to have the feminine mixed with the masculine, but the masculine component, the masculine role in itself, is the identity that you assign to yourself, given the role in your society and how that plays out relative to other people around you. So you need to have an awareness of that. And so my experience has been that the more I tap into the masculine parts of myself, the more comfortable I am with the feminine aspects of myself. It hasn't been the other way around. I haven't had to tap into the feminine to be more comfortable with the masculine. I've had to align with the true masculine and do the disciplines and just have the role, play the role for me to be able to be more comfortable with my feminine. But they're saying the opposite. They're saying that men are too hard. And like, no, that's not what's happening. You're looking at this shit all wrong. And so I understand the prescription that you're giving it and why you're giving it, but it's out of alignment because the perception of what masculinity is skewed. So we need to go and re-identify, are these behaviors actually masculine, or is it overly feminine characteristics masquerading as masculinity? All right. So when we can make those two distinguishments, that's when we can have a better perspective. And so like, oh, that's not actually masculinity. Okay. Masculinity is actually what comes and saves and provides protection from that type of energy. Stoic masculinity will put itself at the front lines to guard against the toxic masculinity. And so the best antidote to toxic masculinity, or what we label toxic masculinity, is actually strong men who are actually embodying their sacred masculine. That's the antidote to what you guys are labeling, or what the world is labeling toxic masculinity, not you guys specifically. So I also want to talk about how women are shamed for their natural innate desires. One of the comments on my video said that all women want is money and a house and resources. And yeah, that's the feminine prerogative. The feminine prerogative is to receive, to be provided for, to be cared for. There is nothing innately wrong with a woman desiring to be taken care of. There is nothing innately wrong with a woman wanting to be provided for and be taken care of. Nothing wrong with that. Don't ever feel guilty as a woman for being in that role, because when a man is making you feel bad or shaming you for that, he's just out of alignment with himself. And so his approach is to take you out of alignment with yourself, and therefore there could be harmony. If we both out of alignment, because I'm playing another role and you playing the opposite role, then we could potentially find alignment, right? But what happens is that this sounds good in theory, but there's underlying nature that we will never be able to override. So a lot of women say they want a man who's tapped in spiritually, right? They want a man who's conscious. And that's perfectly fine. But what happens a lot of the time is that this spiritual consciousness comes coupled with a lack of responsibility. It comes coupled with a lack of discipline. It comes coupled with a lack of embracing the masculine role. So later on in the relationship, they feel the pain and the struggle of lacking the masculine aspects, because they were so focused on hoping that he was spiritual and all these things, which is a good thing, like I said. But if that's out of balance because the masculine isn't activated, you will get the same result over the long term that you get with the man who is masculine but lacks spirituality. You're still not going to be fully fulfilled in that relationship. You're still not going to be fully comfortable with that relationship, because it's always going to feel like there's something missing. So the reason that I've opened up Wild Brotherhood and I shifted my approach to speak more to men is because I recognize the deep inadequacies and holes that we've left out in the spiritual community, in the conscious community. And I think that the quickest route to harmony and to building what we want to build is to empower the masculine, empower the feminine. But because I'm a man, I believe that I should only speak to men. I don't believe that it's the man's responsibility to talk to women, because men understand men and we can hold each other accountable. But as soon as we get in the mind space of telling women what they should be doing, the receptivity a lot of times goes out the window. And all we can do is find alignment within ourselves and share that with other men, right? And so through that, we spread the masculine alignment. And if women take on that role as well on the feminine aspect and spread that through the feminine side, then we get alignment on both sides. So that way, when we come together, we already understand the dynamics. We already understand how we should be coming at each other, what we want, what we're desiring, what our standards are. And so all these things are clear and in order. So it doesn't have to be this gamble of like you're hoping that they have a certain perspective or they're willing to take on certain roles. Like now it's more clear. So then we could operate from a place of clarity instead of gambling away, hoping and wishing that the people that we, get with are in alignment. So that's a lot of the red pill community, right? Red pill is like, women should be doing this. Women are wrong. Women only want money. Women. Like everybody's in that community is trying to tell the women what they should be doing. But a lot of times it's feminine, embracing overly feminine men, wanting and desiring femininity from a woman. So they're thinking that they have to coach a woman how to embrace them and how to be feminine, when the reason they're getting those results in their life is because they're not playing the role to attract what they're actually say that they want. So it's quite a paradox and quite a contradiction to observe, because when you understand energy dynamics and you understand how things are attracted, you don't try to convince the outside or the external to shape to you. You shape yourself, and the external responds and mirrors you in accordance to what you've become. So if you aren't receiving the type of women that you are desiring, if all you see in your reality is women who you do not find optimal or you don't find are at the level that you're wanting, it has nothing to do with the women of the world. It has everything to do with yourself. And that goes both ways. But like I said, I'm only speaking to the men because I only want to communicate with the masculine, because I don't feel it's my place to tell women what they should be doing. So that's my perspective on it. That's why I don't want to build anything on telling women what to do. I just want to share with men how they can receive the kind of results that they're looking for by implementing change in themselves, and therefore attracting and being a more desirable option to the women that they're actually desiring, right? So this leads to a whole nother thing. We have to address the concepts of gender, and we have to address the concepts of gender roles in different societies and different cultures. And there is an idea going around that's popular that people will say things like gender is a social construct, right? And I totally understand where they're coming from. The thing is that most of the shit that we talk about is a social construct. Patriarchy and matriarchy are social constructs. Traditional indigenous people, our ancestors, were not using these words. They were not operating from the perspective of patriarchal versus matriarchal. That's something that developed people in modern times, in the current culture that we're in, started to embrace and create division with, right? So it's interesting to me that we will label gender as a social construct, but all the words that we use to peddle our beliefs aren't social constructs. So where do we draw the line, right? Between distinction and just complete chaos. So it's the human wants to organize, right? We want to organize reality in a way that makes it easier for us to understand. And this is why I love nature. This is why I love wildness, because wildness is honest. Domestication is a motherfucking liar. Domestication will have people out here, I agree with you. Like, it'll have people being fake and phony because they're scared of the social ramifications that have been, the pressure's been put on by people online coming through a motherfucking device. Or wildness would not give a fuck. It will just say what it thinks. It cannot help but express itself transparently and honest. But we've created a culture, a domesticated culture of people who are pressuring one another to not express themselves. And then we wonder why we get the type of dynamics that we get. Because anytime anybody has an opinion other than what you think, you label them the most extreme label that you can place within the culture. Oh, because I don't see things exactly as you see them. I'm a transphobe. I'm a bigot. I'm a racist. I'm all these things. And so you overutilize these words to the point where they don't mean shit. These words don't mean anything anymore because you've used them so frequently for every type of situation that they cease to have meaning. And therefore, you shut down the spirit and the energy of anybody who has any thought that's free and different than what you think. And then you create a homogenous society who's either goes along with it because they're scared or pretends to agree because they don't want to be socially castrated. Or they just convince themselves that that's the truth because they don't want to explore any other frames of thought because you've made it very uncomfortable and socially taboo to even express a slight concern that the idea that they're sharing could potentially be flawed. So that's why I love nature, because nature is honest. It don't give a fuck. It don't give a fuck about your political party. It don't give a fuck about your religious and spiritual beliefs. It don't give a fuck about what you think the world should be. It just is. And if I don't agree with that, I don't see it that way, I just will say it. And that's the energy that I think we should be tapping into. That's the wildness. Domestication wants to tell us and put us in a box and say, yes, all indigenous cultures only or observe more than two genders. Like, no, that's not true. And here's the fucked up thing, that most things that are controversial, both are true. And that's what fucks with people's minds, because we want to homogenize shit, right? So people will say indigenous cultures had more than two genders. Yes, some had more than two genders. Others did not. So the fact that you're focusing on the ones that had more than two is just a bias of your own. But why not highlight the ones that didn't? Oh, because it doesn't help your argument, but it's also a lie. Because now you're just weaponizing indigeneity and ancestral life ways. You're weaponizing that for your own agenda. Instead of just being like, hey, look, I see the world this way. Some indigenous people did, some didn't. And I resonate more so with the ones that did because that's how I see it. Say that. But no, what do people say? No, all indigenous, you're not indigenous unless you align with the LGBTQ plus all these things. And if you don't see things exactly how we see them, you're a transphobe and a bigot. That's not righteous. That is not righteous. And that communication does not lead to understanding. And whenever you shut people out just because you perceive there to be the difference of opinion, you stagnate yourself. There will never be growth unless you're willing to sit down and have a conversation with somebody that thinks differently than you. And your emotional response is a reflection of your level of maturity. So if you respond volatilely because I say, I don't see it that way, that should be also an indicator of your maturity, your emotional intelligence, and your capacity to withstand a difference of opinion. When not allowed to expand further than past our own perception, we become stunted in our development. And so we bottle this shit up, right? And then some motherfucker got to come on live and express what people are thinking, or make a video about what people are thinking, because everybody's too fucking paranoid and too pressured to not want to express it because of how much we've created a situation to box all this shit up, when we should have just been talking about it openly from the beginning. And these are the facts. Boom, 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 boom. You're allowed to have your perspective, but don't distort reality in order to do so. Oh, you believe X, Y, and Z? Cool. You're allowed to have that perspective. Don't say that I should believe that. Don't come on my page and tell me the truth, because then you just become what you're accusing me of. You're accusing me of saying things, this is the way things are, but then you come and say, nah, you're wrong. I know what things are. So you're doing the same shit to me. Rather than being like, oh, I don't look at it that way, but this is how I look at it. But that's not what people do. They come at you very matter-of-factly and then accuse you of the same thing that they're propagating. So you're saying that people shouldn't listen to me, but they should listen to you? Oh, so I don't have any truth and you have all the truth. oh, okay, that's a much better proposition. Hey guys, let's just follow him because he presents himself very humbly, but if you look under the surface, you can see all the narcissism and all this shit is present too. You the same as me, because you trying to tell you trying to tell the world you got the answers. So what the fuck? Like, if we both operating from that space, how are you any better? So maybe we can just reflect on that a little bit.